Okay. Good morning, everyone. So welcome to Agile Lean International 2020. My name is David Denham, and I'm one of your co-chairs for this session.
Good morning, all. I'm Joanna Koprovic, and I'm your other co-chair this morning. We want to extend a massive thank you to all of you for joining us today.
So guys, for those of you who don't know us, we are the Agile Lean Ireland community running in Dublin, Ireland for the past 5 years. So we organise meetups, workshops, events, all done in our volunteer spare time outside of our day jobs, and we're non-for-profit. We also have the happy accident of sharing our initials with one of the biggest legends of boxing.
18 months ago, we decided on the theme of Go For It, leaving the values of courage, focus, and commitment to respond to change and foster breakthrough experimentation. In these changing times, these values have taken on an even more important meaning to us. When we decided to respond to change over following our original plan last March, we wanted to go for it and run an experiment. Could we pivot and run a truly global event?
Okay, so guys, we'd like to do a little temperature check to see where everyone is joining us from today. So what we'd invite you to do, so using the link, using the Q&A, so in the platform, we would invite everyone at the same time to type in the city you're joining us from today. And on the count of 3, we're going to add that together. So we're going to do a little chat storm just to see where people are joining us from. Okay, so on the page, you'll see live Q&A. So if you go into that tab and just type the city you're joining us from today. Okay, 1, 2, 3, go. All right. Okay, lots from Ireland, Cork, Skerries, guys, you're very welcome. Who else we have? London, so a few from the UK, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Cambridge. Welcome, guys. All right. Ohio, Oslo, Bucharest. Guys, you're very welcome. I think I saw one from Antarctica sneak through there. I think we've reached our 7 continents, Joe. Berlin. Okay, so guys, you're very welcome. So as you can see, we have a very international audience here today. So thanks for that, guys. So the 60 plus speakers you're going to hear from over the next couple of days will speak about going for it. So our goal over the next 2 days is to celebrate the courage, focus, and commitment of our community and of our speakers and of every one of you.
We have a phenomenal set of speakers here today. Some of the best international speakers around who will share with us their lessons learned from the experiment, which worked or didn't work for them. We are hugely excited about our 8 dedicated tracks, ranging from agile coaching to enterprise agility to agile testing.
So as agilists, we believe that we learn by doing, right? So, and this, my friends, is our digital experiment. We've never brought our conference online before, and we hope the next 2 days will be a success for the speakers, the sponsors, the delegates, and the technology, fingers crossed.
2020 has been a very challenging year for many people and very stressful for some. For the next 2 days, our call to action to you is to be kind. Be kind to yourself by giving yourself the permission to switch off from your other worries and concerns and focus on just the learning and experimenting with the new ideas. Also, be kind to others by being polite, generous with your time where possible, and starting conversations and listening.
So as we seek to only cover our costs, and as so many people have kindly and generously given us their time, energy, and expertise, we thought we could be kind on your behalf by helping Camera Education, an award-winning international non-for-profit whose mission is to use technology to improve education for children in low-income communities. So let's acknowledge all the great work Camera is doing.
We would like to extend a few thank yous before we kick off. Thank you to all our volunteers and organizing team for all your hard work in preparing for today and for moderating the talks over the next 2 days. A big thank you to you, our community, and thank you very much to our sponsors for supporting us on running this event. Without you, the event wouldn't happen. We would like to invite you to join the virtual exhibition area on this platform and to learn more about our great speakers and sponsors and how they can help you.
Thanks, Joe. So with that, I'd like to pass briefly over to Keith Lynch from our goal sponsor, Red Hat, to say a few words. Keith is a country manager for Red Hat in Ireland.
Brilliant. Thank you, David, and thank you, Joanna, and the organisers. So my name is Keith Lynch. I'm the country manager for Red Hat in Ireland, and we're really proud to be a sponsor of the event. Great to see it evolving from Agile Lean Ireland to Agile Lean International. Just checking if my slides are up. Is that good? Thumbs up from the AV team. Good stuff. I'm going to assume they are. So basically, I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes going through Red Hat's pivot really from a product company to one focusing on culture, people, and process. So if you know Red Hat in the kind of Agile space, we would go and have products like we're an enterprise software company. Two of our main big products in the Agile space are OpenShift, which is our enterprise distribution of Kubernetes and Docker, and Ansible for automation. You can imagine over the last 8 years trying to work with these technologies and products with people and companies and our partners and customers. None of these products solve the problem on their own. So tools aren't a silver bullet. And so about 5-6 years ago, we were realizing with a lot of our customers and partners that products weren't going to be the solution. And actually, to solve agile and agility issues within customers, we had to change our approach to how we were working with our customers. So in 2015, Jim Whitehurst wrote a book called The Open Organization, which effectively tried to bottle up what Red Hat do in its DNA and the culture of how we build our software. So everything we build is open. It's all open source. We support like enterprise distributions of those products. And moving on from that, we then created Open Innovation Labs, which became part of this movement within Red Hat to try and effectively take and bottle up how we build our software and how we're successful doing things in the open source with communities, and bring this to our customers and to our partners. And effectively, a product's not going to be the solution. We see coming along the journey and helping you discover how you change your culture, how you change people, and how you change your processes. Actually, that's normally the meat of the problem as opposed to the tools. The tools definitely help. So we've had some great things that have come out of that, like the Open Practice Library. So this is, a library of all these practices like event slide or priority sliders, event storming, and the Mobius loop, which you can see here on screen. And we have a course. It's a 5-day training course called DevOps Culture and Practice Enablement, and it bottles up all of these different practices and delivers them as a kind of a training for people who want to learn how to do things differently. So it's about changing, your practices and your process. And then we also, on top of that, hired a number of various, well-known people within the industry who you probably know, people who are co-authors of Phoenix Project, and people who've worked on DevOps Days, people who've wrote DevOps handbooks. So, we've really invested into. We don't think it's just about products. We think it's, agility is about people, process, and culture. And the great thing is, over the next 2 days, we have a good couple of speakers from Red Hat. So Donal and Val up in the top will be speaking today. We also have Kerry Laird, who's going to be speaking, and they're doing a workshop that's probably full at this stage on design thinking. And then we're very happy to have John Willis as well, who's doing a session tomorrow. And we're at the booth all through the 2 days. So have a great conference. We're really happy sponsors. We're open. So enjoy the conference, enjoy our talks, and feel free to come to our booth. So David, that's it for me. Back to you.
Okay, thanks, Keith. Okay, so without further ado, we'd like to introduce you to our first speaker. So he divides his time between two roles: Chief Scientific Officer of Cognitive Edge and the founder and head of the Cynefin Centre. His work is international in nature and covers government and industry, looking at complex issues relating to strategy and organizational decision-making. His paper on leadership was the cover article for the Harvard Business Review in November 2007. He's also the main designer of the SenseMaker software suite, originally developed in the field of counter-terrorism and now being actively deployed in both government and agile organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce Dave Snowden.
Thank you for that. And let's try and share a screen. Okay, firstly, it's a great regret I'm not with you. I had a whole, holiday planned around McGillycully's Reeks and possibly Connemara if we'd actually been in the right place. But in tribute, I'm actually wearing the Aran Islands cardigan I got from when we ran a retreat there last year, and I've got the Agile Scotland t-shirt on, and in the background, the Welsh mountains. So there's a Celtic theme to this, all right, in terms of the way it works. The title of this is From Adaptation to Exaptation. Now, there's a double layer on this. What I'm going to be talking about is novel ways to innovate. And that's got a sub-agenda in it, is that Agile is kind of like reaching the end of its life cycle at the moment. It's becoming heavily commoditized. So there's a sub-theme on this, is how do we reinvent Agile, not just how do we create methods for innovation, as I go through this. Right, and I'll talk a bit about that as we do. So first of all, I'm going to start off with a little bit of theory. I need to explain some stuff. I'm going to do some situation of methods within the Cynefin framework. And then from that, I'm going to talk about 8 or 9 new or different methods or tools or combinations, which kind of like handle this issue about radical innovation, or also what's known as radical repurposing. And I'm going to try and finish at past so that there's time, 15 minutes left for questions. I think that's the correct timing. Yeah, so that's the plan. First of all, on the theory side, this is, and I'm not going to do much build. I'm going to put up a few slides and go with it. The name for what I do overall is called naturalizing sense making. Sense making I define as how do I make sense of the world so that I can act in it. And that has a concept of sufficiency about it, yeah? But just to sort of push back a little bit on David, you don't learn by doing, you learn by thinking and doing. It's the combination of the two which matters, right? And the abuse of the word empirical in Agile continues to disturb anybody with a background training in philosophy, but that's on one side for the moment. That approach is now recognized as one of the 5 distinct schools of sense making. This is from Epic. You can look at Oxford University Press. And the traditional ones people know about are Weick, Russell, Dervin, Klein. Now Snowden is up there as one of the 5, right? Now, from my personal journey on this, I came from big data, from data analytics, from artificial intelligence, from decision support systems. So that's my background. I was both a consultant, a coder, and then a general manager in those fields. So kind of like all of that sort of stuff around Russell and Shannon and informatics, Ashby and the like, that's kind of like my background. Yeah. I know Gary Klein and I know Brenda Dervin really well, and we've worked together a lot. And Weick is kind of like the granddaddy of this, but he doesn't talk to us ordinary mortals. So those are distinct schools. Now I've put that up and I've put the reference. So if you want to know more about sense making and the differences, that's key. The thing I wanted to bring out on this, and this is not my name, is if you don't understand why something works, you can't scale what you did last time. And that's actually a key principle that a lot of people in Agile just don't learn. The fact that something worked for you in one context doesn't mean it will work in another context. Yeah. And the other thing, and I'll make this as a general statement, you scale a complex system by decomposition and recombination. You don't scale it by aggregation or imitation. And if you think about it, the whole of organic life comes from reassembling 4 basic chemicals. So the traditional approach to scaling in Agile is to take something you've done and just make it bigger. And that is actually wrong, to use a philosophical term, a priori. It's wrong before the fact. It doesn't matter if you can get it to work on an ad hoc basis, it won't work on a sustainable basis. So in terms of scaling, we need to start to understand what are the coherent components, what are the things that we're working with, either as problems or tools or methods. And we now need to allow those methods and tools to reassemble to create unique approaches. So one of the major arguments I and others are making in Agile at the moment is the trend towards large, highly structured scaling frameworks is actually a mistake. What we actually need to do is to assemble smaller methods and tools which have unique capability and recombine them very quickly to handle flexibility and resilience within companies. Now, I wanted to put that up front because I wanted to give you some of the theoretical background, all right? And with the concept of sense making, in my definition, how do I make sense of the world so that I can act in it? There's a concept of sufficiency. So it's how do I know that I know enough to do something? Because we can never fully know anything. And many years ago, I created two overlapping 2x2 matrices, which looked at known, unknown, and critically unknowable. Made the mistake of presenting them in the Pentagon once, and then couldn't use them for about 5 years thereafter. They got absconded with. But one of the key things on that is the concept that some things are inherently unknowable. It's not that you failed to do the analysis or you failed to actually understand the situation. It's that you will not know about them until you take action. It's only when you do something that something becomes visible. And of course, the other thing within that matrix, which is critical, and I'm going to talk a lot about that today directly and indirectly, is what is called the unknown knowns. So the things that we know in an organization, which are unknown to the decision maker. And that's one of the most neglected areas. And one of the reasons that's important is that people don't see what they don't expect to see. So I'll give you the famous experiment on this. If you give radiologists a batch of x-rays, you ask them to look for anomalies, and on the final x-ray, you put a picture of a gorilla, which is 48 times the size of a cancer nodule. On average, 83% of radiologists won't see it, even though their eyes scan it. Yeah, we literally do not see what we do not expect to see. And in that one simple scientific fact, I've just disowned most of the approaches to systems analysis and interviewing. Because as you start to interview people, as you start to structure, say, a storyboard or something like that, you're actually only picking up on the data that you expect to see in that situation, and you're missing a whole body of other material. So what I'm going to also focus on as I come through this is what is called outlier mapping. It's the ability to find the 17% of your employees who are seeing things differently from everybody else before they talk to the 83% and come to believe they were wrong. So that's kind of like the big picture on that. Okay, so let me run into Cynefin. The first book came out on Cynefin yesterday. If you haven't seen it on Amazon, we're quite pleased. It's actually at #1 on the Kindle list, so that went in 48 hours. I've now got to write the actual book as opposed to the one with everybody's talk about what they've done with it. So we've gone the other way around. You normally do the theory book and then you do the workbook. We've done the workbook and then we'll do the theory book, right? I think they're trying to make me feel guilty. Either way, the current version of Cynefin identifies 5 different states. Now, I really have to keep emphasizing this. I've heard people talk about the 5 quadrants of Cynefin, which rather worries me about the state of their education. It's like a former British Prime Minister who said he wanted every school to be above average, which rather indicates his wasn't, at least in basic mathematics. Right? Cynefin actually has 5 principal domains: clear, complicated, complex, chaotic, and confused. And actually the confused one is as important as the others. Now, the difference between these, and I'll do this at a high level, but then I want to go and focus on innovation, is in the clear domain, there is an absolutely self-evident relationship between cause and effect. We can apply best practice. In Ireland and the UK, we drive on the left-hand side of the road. In Germany, they drive on the right-hand side of the road. It's obvious what you should do. In complicated, that's the domain of expertise. It's where you can trust the expert. Now, just to be clear, it doesn't mean you don't use experts in the other domain. What it means is in this domain, if you have expertise in the field, you can trust their recommendation. You don't need to double check it. Yeah, so that's the structured side. You then get the complex domain, and the key thing to understand about complexity is that systems are non-causal. There is no material linear causality. Complex systems are dispositional, which means they have many evolutionary possibilities and you can't predict how they will evolve. And that's why we start to measure energy gradients and dispositions and find outliers. And I'll show you a fitness landscape later to illustrate that. So complexity is a space of unknown unknowables, of unknown unknowns. It's a space where inherently we have to experiment in order to discover what's possible. But this is where I come into one of the critical differences between the sort of real understanding of complexity in Agile and shall we say, the initial understanding. A lot of people got the concept of experimentation, and that's where Scrum came from. But Scrum is a single linear experiment. Yeah, actually in complexity. I don't know how to respond to that. Sorry, Siri went off on my watch. All right. In complex world, you do parallel safe to fail experiments, not a single sequential experiment. Because the key thing to understand about complex world is there are multiple valid hypotheses about what should work, and you can't test them one at a time, because every time you do something, the space changes anyway. So you switch from linear iteration to parallel experimentation. And I'll give you some examples on that on methods in a minute. And then we get the chaotic domain, which is a state of no constraints. It's pseudo randomness. Yeah, kind of like everything is all over the place. You have no coherence, which means, just to be clear, it's a temporary space. I've seen people show this space and show a fire with firefighters. That's not chaotic. That's complex. I've seen people show pictures of Mumbai traffic. Now, I've walked across the street in Mumbai and I know how to do it. You just walk in a straight line at a constant speed and nothing will hit you. If you sort of hesitate and wait for a clear line, you're dead, right? Roughly the same thing applies in southern Italy, by the way, but with slightly lower volume, but it's the same principle. So, sorry to come back to this. So a chaotic system is only ever a transitionary state. It's a temporary state. Now, there were two major developments in Cynefin over the last few years. One is the introduction of liminality. That's the green space. Now, liminality is a state of suspended transition. So if you look at it in so-called primitive communities, when the shaman puts on a mask, there's a state of transition between who they were and what the mask represents. Now, liminality is one of the ways that we reduce risk. If you can hold things in a state of transition, you reduce your commitment, you put off your commitment, right? And that's actually really useful in a complex space. The great strength of techniques like Scrum and also most of Kanban is actually they're a liminal technique to make the complex complicated. They actually are not quite sure what you want to do, but you've got within these bounds, within this variation, you know what you've got to produce, and therefore we can do it. So we go through the linear iteration, the constant small cycles, the 2-week cycles and so on. We clear the backlog. That's all dealing with things where we've got ambiguity, but we roughly know what we've got to do, or we can identify the performance criteria to say whether we succeeded or not. So again, that's Scrum's great power. It's also, without Scrum, Agile would have never been known. It wouldn't have scaled, is its ability to make the complex complicated so it can go into operational systems. What it doesn't do well is deal with the truly complex. And I'm going to go through some methods for that in a minute. The other aspect of liminality is what we call the abductive domain. Now, here I need to do some stats. There are 3 types of logic: deductive, inductive, abductive. So deductive is if A, then B. Inductive is all the cases of A have B associated with them. So I can assume that if I've got A, I will see B. That's kind of like the basics of most case-based approaches. You know, these 15 companies all do this, they're successful, maybe I should do this, I may become successful. And that's okay if you take it as a good idea. It's bad if you take it as deterministic. You then get into the confusion of correlation with causation, which is a major problem in management science. But there's nothing wrong with induction. It means we can learn from the past to give us guidance for the future. Abduction, which is the great contribution of the American pragmatists to logic, is sometimes known as a logic of hunches. It's how do I make a connection between things which are apparently unconnected? Now, that's actually what innovation is about. And the big problem on induction is how is one person's intuitive leap more valuable than somebody else's intuitive leap? And that's the problem I was given when we worked on counterterrorism before and after 9/11 for DARPA in Washington, was how to create an objective approach to abduction at scale. And I'm going to talk about some of that in a second. So those are liminal domains. And then the big development this year was splitting confused, which used to be called unordered, into 2, aporetic and confused. And it's green and red. So basically, and I'll give you the definition, sorry, wrong sequence. I'll come back to that in a second. So if I look through the four domains and look at them in the context of innovation, the complicated domain is where most innovation takes place. This is a space of peer-based validation. You're not going to be accepted to experiment, for example, on antiviral drugs or immunization policy unless you have some sort of qualification in that field. Although in the US these days, if you're good at producing domestic cleaners, you might be considered a good epidemiologist, but we're trying to get away from that sort of stuff, right? Basically, this peer-based validation within communities. It's what I often call incremental innovation, and it can be interdisciplinary in its nature. So you can bring different disciplines together to compare results. And that can be very powerful. One of the things I've done a lot of is bring people from a completely different discipline into a team. So with civil engineers once, I brought in a biologist who studied spiders. And by the end of 2 days, we had a whole new approach to bridge building, because we took one discipline and we applied it to something where people had never thought about that. Some of the techniques for spider web building, for example, are now incorporated into engineering techniques. So that's a sort of interdisciplinary, bringing disciplines together, getting people to think differently. And very little of that is done within the Agile community. Yeah, they don't bring in anthropologists, they don't bring in behavioral scientists, they don't bring in people who understand human beings into the design process. It's kind of like the assumption is the users know what they want, we'll design it. Actually, frequently, users don't know what you can do for them. This is one of the big problems with technology, is the speed of technology advance is going faster than the ability of users to place a requirement on tech teams. Yeah, and that's one of the big things we've got to recognize. Yeah. Planning is possible in this space. You know the experts, you know where to go to. You know, this is kind of like a traditional innovation program. This is where you can use design thinking, you can use the double diamond. Yeah, all of those sort of approaches work in that space because they assume a linear process and they assume that expertise exists and can be trained. So again, nothing wrong with that. Some of that material will go into the clear domain, but that tends to be engineering. I'll give you an example on that. We actually now know the science of how we can refreeze the poles. This is a pet project of mine on climate change. If we could actually refreeze the poles, we could give ourselves another 30 years breathing space. So we know the science, but we don't know the engineering. So that was like when Kennedy said, we have to place a man on the moon by date X. The science of how to do it was known, but the engineering execution wasn't. Right? And just hold that thought. So there's a lot of things where once we know the why, the how is just effectively a linear process. We can designate that, but that initial why is more difficult. So complicated goes into clear. In a chaotic domain, you're actually going to get innovation anyway. Human beings are really good at this. In a real crisis, they either collapse and break down, or they do something completely novel. It's the old thing about, you know, warfare produces more innovation than anything else, because under conditions of extreme stress, people will change. I was talking with a whole bunch of people in the health service yesterday, and they were saying, we did all this innovative stuff when COVID hit. Why can't we carry on doing it? And the answer is, well, you can't carry on doing it because you haven't got a crisis anymore. It's no longer chaotic. So when you've got a mega crisis and everything is all over the place, people will accept things. They will not accept instability. And that's just the fact of life. So the creation of micro chaos, the creation of complete disconnection between things allows you to do a lot, but you'll generally be into draconian control. The really interesting area here is the complex domain. Now, this is actually where what I call effectively exaptive innovation stands. Now, this is one of two words I'm going to introduce today, which are probably unfamiliar. Exaptation comes from evolutionary biology. So a dinosaur's feathers adapt over time for warmth and or sexual display. You can see that in the fossil record. Turns out, by the way, that all dinosaurs had feathers and they were colored. We're discovering that from the fossil record in northern China. And then some dinosaurs with a lot of feathers, run fast along the ground to escape a predator, and the feathers cause them to take off. Yeah, so something which evolved for one function under conditions of stress doesn't adapt, it exapts for a completely different function. The cerebellum at the base of your brain evolved in higher mammals to manipulate muscles in fingers. In humans, it exapts to manage grammar in human language. The huge sophistication of human language couldn't happen in a linear way. It's too big an evolutionary leap. It required something which evolved for one function to be repurposed. Yeah? If you think that's not relevant, in 1945, a Raytheon engineer maintaining the magneto of a radar machine noticed that a chocolate bar melted in his pocket. Now, this has happened to a lot of engineers, but fundamentally, they all just swore and had their trousers cleaned. In this case, he realized the significance. We got microwave ovens. Put a metal box around that magneto and you can cook. Yeah, that's exaptation, radical repurposing. And of course, at a conference in Canada once, one pharmaceutical research and developer mentioned a rather embarrassing side effect from a pill that they developed, and that became Viagra. Right? If you actually look at it, most pharmaceutical development is based on noticing small side effects. Yeah. So one of the key things to do in any evolutionary environment where you're taking an evolutionary approach to innovation is you need to monitor for side effects. Yeah, it's a small, unexpected things you didn't expect to see. But of course, the problem is you're not going to focus on that because 83% of you won't see a gorilla, even if it's in plain sight. So this is the issue of what's called weak signal detection. How do we spot something and bring people's attention to it early? And that's called exaptive innovation. Bricolage is quite an interesting concept here. It's where something develops for one purpose and gets used for completely else. You can see that in architecture with things like spandrels. Yeah. And this type of innovation only happens where you have lots of small things constantly interacting with fast feedback loops. It doesn't happen if you have big problems with large structures. It requires very small things with lots of interactions. And that creates niche ecosystems in which things can work. So that's kind of like the complex domain. Now, the other thing which is important for this is the other part of the confused central domain, which is what we call aporetic. Now, there are times when you need to introduce new words, and I'm doing that now, right? Heidegger famously said, man thinks he's the master of language, but language is the master of man. If you actually don't change people's language, you don't change the way they think, right? If you go too far, it becomes jargon. But people who can't cope with any new language are people who have decided not to change. Yeah, language actually changes the way we think about things. Aporetic is probably not familiar. It comes from Derrida in the modern form. But one of the things Derrida says is a decision isn't a decision if you know what to do. That's the process. Yeah, decisions only focus where nobody knows what to do and nobody can agree. And in philosophy, we use aporia to create paradoxes which force people to think differently. A paradox is not the same thing as a dilemma. Yeah, so the famous one on this, which everybody knows, is called the liar's paradox. So in a witness stand, I say, I always lie. Well, that means I just lied, so I tell the truth. You see what I'm doing with that? Or Zeno's paradox. Yeah, what paradoxes do is they force you to think differently about a problem because you can't just apply a process, and that's called an aporetic process. So the deliberate creation of confusion, the deliberate creation of ambiguity forces people to see things they wouldn't otherwise see. Now, one of the ways we do that is to create what are called fitness maps. So this is actually a map from, I can't remember what program it was, but what we've done here is to present a problem to thousands of people. We've got them to interpret that problem in real time. And there's a whole process on this called high abstraction metadata. And from all of those people interpreting the data, we've drawn a map. And we've shown how different groups of people see the same data. So you can see on this map, that sort of red blob towards the top is kind of like an outlier. It's a small group of people who are thinking very differently from the big group of green in the middle and so on. And by the way, this is also how we do cultural mapping. You map what the different cultures are as well as mapping the outliers. So this type of technique, which is called outlier mapping, is designed to make the 17% visible before they talk with the 83%. So if you have a massive intractable problem, what you do is to present the problem to the whole of your workforce and your extended networks, get them all to interpret it, produce micro scenarios about possible failures, and then you plot all of that input into a single screen like this. And your decision makers can then find dominant views, minority views, and outliers. So it's a matter of making very visible that there are 17 people who've seen the gorilla out of 100, and you need to go and talk with them. So that's kind of like an outline mapping technique. And some of the others, I'm going to run through these quickly just to give you an idea of them. And just to say, we're currently in the process of putting all of these into a wiki, and that wiki will be open source. Right? We're also starting to produce method cards and things for this. So all of these things will go into an open source wiki shortly. So let me just run through some of these. And these are all in the complex domain. If an agile community, I sometimes talk about them as pre-Scrum techniques, things you do before you get into techniques like Scrum. So trios is quite interesting. We've done a lot of this over the years in social change as well as everything else. So for example, in major social change programs in South Wales, we put very young people with very old people with somebody from government. Yeah, so what I've got, and that's some sound neuroscience behind that, by the way, you're innovative under 25 and over 45, but not much between. And there are biological reasons for that. So we put young people with older people, and we put them with somebody who can make their ideas happen. And we have 30 or 40 trios looking at a problem, rather than just taking one idea and seeing whether it will work or not. In system definition, we take a young, bright coder who can do prototypes quickly, together with a systems architect or an end system tester, somebody who sees the system as a whole, and put them together with a user trained to talk to IT people. Because it's a lot easier to train users to talk to IT people than get IT people to understand users. So instead of actually having a systems analyst go and interview people, we'll throw 30 or 40 trios at a problem and see what they come up with, and then pick the things we like. You see what I'm doing? It's parallel, small, but I'm bringing high levels of cultural and experiential diversity into the trios. Some of the work we're now doing on resilience in organizations, and I'll just drop a hint on this, is called role-based trios, in which you define maybe 15 or 16 roles within the organization. Then you define multiple three-way interactions between roles, and that becomes a new organizational structure. It's a different way of doing self-organization. But the basic concept of 3 people from radically different backgrounds looking at a problem and multiple groups of 3 looking at the problem simultaneously is a better way of doing user requirements capture than sending out an analyst to interview users, and it's both faster and more engaging. Social network stimulation, which is actually building the informal network. There's a metaphor here. There's a fungus which lives in soil, which provides the nutrients for plants. Without that fungus, plants need a huge amount of chemical input. And in an organization, the informal network is the fungus to the formal system. If you don't have a dense, tightly connected network, the formal system hasn't got the informal network to sustain itself. I worked for IBM for 7 years, and basically every decision was really made in the informal networks, and the formal system followed. So social network stimulation as a technique is one that means within 18 months, everybody will be in 3 degrees of separation of everybody else, based on a trust-based relationship built by working together, not by being taken into a workshop and taken through some motivational exercise. We don't trust people because we're told we should trust them. We trust them because we've been through hell together. And so we're kind of like replicating that process. 888, this was actually one of the original DSDM techniques. And if you don't know it, DSDM started in the UK. 3 of us got together in a pub in Cheltenham. We didn't have ski resorts available, but that's where DSDM started all those years ago. 888 is a deliberate mutation technique where you run a JAD session. So remember, people have forgotten about JAD. It was one of the great techniques. Joint application design. You bring users together with prototypers, and over a day, you produce a series of prototypes about what the system should do. Very effective technique. Originally developed by IBM in Canada a long time ago. So we did a lot of work on JAD. So we ran an 8-hour JAD, say in London, and we produce a prototype. We send that prototype onto another development team in Mumbai, and they don't get access to the original requirement. All they get to see is the output. And they have 8 hours to make it better. Then they pass it on to a team in LA. 8-hour time difference, you can see where it comes from. And that team has the same instruction. Then it comes back to the original. In the UK, this is called Chinese whispers, which is a slightly racist term. It's that one kid whispers in another kid's ear, and then you see how it mutates as you go down. Every time we've done that, when the users have looked at the result, they've said, God, I wouldn't have thought of that. Can I please have it? So what we're doing is a very short cycle process where mutation is inevitable, because mutation is where you get novelty. And again, you can see what I'm trying to do here is to create processes. I'm not talking about the type of people who can be innovative. I'm creating processes which can make anybody innovative. The Triopticon, we're currently running this at the moment. That's where we use this in peace and conflict resolution. It's where you bring 3 experts together and they go through a structured dance. And around them, there are 21 partial experts who interpret what they say. And you go through a series of interactions between those groups to actually create novelty at the end of the process. Now, again, I haven't got time to describe that. I'm just flagging it. Maps are actually also important. And there are 2 types of map. It's fascinating this. If you map something, the map defines the territory. So when I go walking, and I do that a lot, and I can't do this in Ireland, one of the great advantages of the UK is it's the most mapped territory in the world. So if I go walking in Snowdonia, I've got a 1 to 50,000 Ordnance Survey map, a 1 to 25,000 Ordnance Survey map, and a 1 to 40,000 Harvey's map on my iPhone. The one I walk to is the 1 to 40,000 because it's an orienteers map. So whereas the Ordnance Survey has everything, every stone wall, every field boundary, basically the Harvey's map only has the things a walker needs to know, like what type of cliff it is and what type of bog it is. That's of particular importance in Ireland. And interestingly, Harvey's maps exist for most of the Irish mountains because the Ordnance Survey is poor. So the issue is, and this is called fractal mapping, is maps which identify different features allow people to see patterns. Counterfactual maps are effectively alternative maps. So if I take the Mercator projection of the Earth and I simply turn it through 90 degrees, you see the world differently. I create a counterfactual. Right? So that type of mapping is another set of techniques. Anthro Simulation is a game. We originally developed this in the context of military decision-making. It's where you have, and you'll now realize I watched too much Star Trek when I was very young. In fact, I did all my maths homework at school to the first series of Star Trek. You have 3 teams who work in parallel and a human games master. And you set up an environment in which they have to do a situational assessment and come up with an action plan. And while they're doing that, the games team constantly feed them novel and disruptive data. Once they've done their action plan, they come up with it, they go away for 2 hours, they come back, whatever they did has proved to be a disaster. Again, the Star Trek association. And then they go through that 3 times and they realize they're doomed to fail. Whatever they do, the games team can set up a situation where they miss something. Now, we did this in a very structured way with Gary Klein. At the end of 3 rounds of that, people are scanning 20 to 30 times more data before they make a decision than at the start. Because failure forces you to think broadly, success doesn't. Now those, and we can also do those in metaphorical environments. So the use of human-mediated gaming techniques to actually force novelty out, that's Anthro Simulation. And I've talked also about outlier mapping. So what I wanted to do in this presentation is kind of like just say, look, there are a whole body of tools and techniques which have been developed, which fit in the truly complex space. And that's where I get complete novelty or exaptive innovation. And I thought I'd finish with a Welsh poem, all right? There's an old joke about the English is they need the Irish and the Welsh and the Scots to provide their poems. And we actually claim Shakespeare because he grew up so close to the Welsh border, there must be an association. And 750 words in English are actually Welsh that was brought across by Shakespeare, but that's another matter. You can read this at your leisure, but the key thing is the bright field. This is retrospective coherence. Yeah, you can pass by something you didn't realize was significant, and later you suddenly realize it was highly significant. Yeah, and that's what weak signal detection is about. With the benefit of hindsight, everybody can tell you what you should have paid attention to, but hindsight doesn't lead to foresight. So if we want people to pay attention to small things, it's not about the qualities of the people, it's about the processes which prevent them actually not seeing things. So what I've tried to do is to give you the wider sense on that and give you some idea of methods and tools. The methods, I say, will go into the public domain shortly. Yeah, I don't want to make those proprietary. And kind of like open to questions from that point. I think I've managed the timing just about okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much, David. We very appreciate it. And before we go to the questions, just a reminder, guys, on the right-hand side, there is a panel and you have a tab there, live Q&As. So if you have any questions, we already have you. Please type them there. And David, the first question we had was about your book. Can you once again tell us the name of your newest book?
It just came out. It's called Cynefin. It was a surprise for me. I didn't know it. If you don't know it, it's the 21st anniversary of Cynefin creation this year. And my colleagues decided to put together a book on this, and they conned me into writing an article about the history of Cynefin, which they said was going to on the website. So that's a chapter. And the book was presented to me last Saturday. Somebody shoved it through the door, right? So that's now available Kindle in printed form. Yeah. So it's got the whole history of Cynefin in it, but it's also got a whole series of perspectives on it from multiple practitioners around the world. So if you type in Cynefin on the Kindle store, you'll find it.
Yeah, and just to be specific, the full title is Cynefin, Weaving Sense-Making into the Fabric of Our World.
Yeah, and it's got a great front cover quote from John Seeley Brown, who's one of my heroes anyway. So to have him put a quote on the front is brilliant. And it's this idea of we're going from enlightenment rationality to entangled rationality. And I love that, from enlightenment to entanglement.
Okay, thanks Gary McNeil for that question. Good to see you. We have a question from Manish. So Manish is asking, in complicated, is scaling agile possible? Should we do more planning in advance as experts have solution in complicated space? If expert put the effort in for say 2 days out of a 100-day project.
Yeah, I think you should. And I think this is the problem. You've got this tendency in Agile is everybody thinks their method is context free and universal, whereas actually any method is always context specific. So if you've got a highly structured requirement, Scrum is a waste of time. Time boxes are much neglected. I'm a huge fan of time boxes. So in a time box, you say we will always deliver something to the user on this date. We will always commit to that because date matters more. Agile people get this wrong. Dates matter more to users than functionality when it comes down to it. And you basically have a range of delivery from MVP to full functionality. And you can vary resource or delivery, but you can't vary time. And now that's a highly structured method, highly developed technique. It's been much neglected, and I would do it. And then there's nothing wrong with waterfall. I remember working with Telstra in Australia up in Brisbane, and nobody got promoted if they weren't agile. But they had waterfall projects. So they created 1-year sprints so they could say they were agile, which I thought was quite clever, really, right? So again, this is the point I made at the start about multiple methods, right? If you're in the complicated or the clear domain, you can scale existing practice. You can do more of it you can actually structure it. If you're in a complex domain, you don't scale that way. Yeah, so this is a both and, not an either or proposition.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay, thank you very much. One question, guys, is about recordings. So recordings will be available for the full year from the 3rd of November. So yes, you will be able to watch it again. And another question, David, is where, oh, sorry, it's jumping. I lost the question. Where can we find the wiki you mentioned, David?
If you keep an eye on my blog and on the website, we'll publicize it when it's up, all right? We're currently in the process of creating it. To be honest, it's also me starting to look at how we do certification, because I don't buy accreditation in which you turn up for 2 days, you fill out a multi-choice questionnaire after over 3 weeks and then say you're a master or something. Or worse still, you pay for some slides every year and reread it, and that means you can continue with your certification, all right? I mean, of course, those are fictional examples, you understand. One of the things we're looking at, for example, is if people contribute to the wiki, how often are they reverted? Because that actually means you don't understand it. So we can create longitude measures of understanding within that structure, and that's one of the reasons why we're broadening it. I also think that we're moving into a network world where you need to make things available for free. I mean, we'll monetize that by producing method cards and books, but the initial methods need to be open. The great strength of Cynefin is I forced IBM to put it in the public domain, which meant people could pick it up and use it without our controlling it. And I've fought that ever since. Internally, people saying, well, we should get the trademark and we should stop people using it. Well, we should get the trademark because that stops somebody else doing it, but we shouldn't stop people using it. Yeah, the strength of things is when people use things without you being present, then they evolve and you learn from that.
Okay.
Thank you.
So just another question. So Gary's asking, so you mentioned Agile is becoming commoditized. Could you dive a bit deeper on that?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is called apex predator theory. This is one of my main focuses at the moment, right? Cynefin is now complete, which means I can write the other book. And once we resolve the unordered issue and got out there, that's fine, right? So apex predator theory is more important in some ways. It basically says what happens is you get a dominant idea. The dominant idea is very useful. Nothing can challenge it. So people, I'll give the technology example on this. I mean, when I was first a general manager, IBM was a dominant player. The phrase was nobody gets fired for buying IBM. Right? Now that means you're reaching the end of a commodification cycle. You could have better hardware, everybody had better hardware. You could have better software, everybody had better software. I mean, VAX clusters were far better than AS400s, but I reveal my prejudice at this point, right? What then happened is IBM didn't realize that the market was shifting from hardware to software. They were actually protected from that because the revenue streams from hardware, because they were the top of the supply chain, they didn't have to drop their price where everybody else did. And then one day they woke up to the fact that the world was about software, not hardware. And remember, they gave the IP and Windows away to Microsoft. And then the same thing happened to Microsoft. They thought it was all about software, and Apple took over because Apple realized it was about ecosystem. So these cycles come. And the indication of the end of a cycle is where the thing is highly commodified and highly structured. So you can see it with design thinking and you can see it with Agile. Everything is online methods, tools, certification schemes, everything is codified. It appears to be diverse because everybody is fighting over who's got the best method, but the materials have become commodified. So Agile is at the end of that cycle. Okay? The way we absolutely knew was happening when SAFe came along, because things like SAFe only come along to consolidate the late adopter stage of a market. And there's no point in being a small Agile consultancy when the big consultancy firms all offer Agile, because it's safe to buy from a big consultancy firm if things go wrong. It's not safe to buy from a small firm. Right? So where we are now is what's the next thing coming through? Now, the good news is the energy cost of being different is lower than the energy cost of competing with an apex predator. So novelty can come through quickly. My view on this, and to say we're now doing work, the reason we're releasing methods and we're doing more work with Cynefin is I don't think anybody should own the next wave in the way that Scrum owned Agile initially. But what we need is a multi-methods approach. Yeah, this is my going back to my object orientation days in the 90s. Yeah, and I always used to argue at Corba committees then, people are objects too. Yeah, people have inheritance, they have polymorphism, they have input-output. And my view of the future of software development is you create what's called scaffolding, and we've got a whole typology of those developed now, and you define input-output rules for software, technology, and people, and you allow applications to emerge from that interaction. Right? And that means the workman picks his own tools, or the workwoman picks her own tools. Right? You're not forced into one approach or one method. You use different methods in different contexts. What we need is for their input-output to define so they can be easily linked. And that's why I called a lot of the techniques I'm developing pre-Scrum. I'm not trying to replace Scrum. I'm trying to improve the input to Scrum, because Scrum is brilliant at that liminal takeover. It's like in Kanban, yeah? Yeah, Kanban is a complicated technique, not because restricted work in progress is complicated, but because the way it represents with post-it notes on columns is complicated. So we're looking at, can we represent restricted work in progress as a landscape of potentialities rather than a set of structured tasks? And it's this multi-methods type approach we need to do.
Okay. Another question is around what are the other small tools that you feel the community should build instead of scaling methodologies?
I think some of it is rediscovery. I think we could, I mean, I'll come back to Rad and Jad, all right? There were heavyweight techniques in the 90s, in the early part of the century. Everybody's neglected them. I think they need to be reinvented with modern technology. Yeah, we've actually got much faster prototyping techniques than we had then. So I think some of this is kind of like reinvention, right? I think also we need to break some of the other tools up a bit. So I would break up Scrum and create, and I've seen good Scrum coaches do this. They don't always have a 2-week period. Sometimes they have a 3-week, sometimes they have a 4-week, sometimes a 2-day. So we need to break the existing tools down into a finer level of granularity and allow them to recombine in different ways. Yeah. The trouble is the way they taught won't allow that, because people aren't taught principles, they're taught practice. And there's a real problem in the Agile community is everybody thinks, well, if it worked for me, it's okay. That's what they mean by empirical. Yeah, and we need a higher level of theory training in this, because if you understand why, you know how to scale. So I would look at that. I'd also look at methods from other industries. Yeah, there's a whole body of stuff from behavioral science, and I don't mean the nudge guys, all right, because those guys are either evil or wrong or both, right? But there's a whole body of, if you look at human geography, yeah, if you look at anthropology, there are tools and techniques there which could be brought sideways into the Agile community tomorrow and have a major impact. I mean, we, for example, have, I haven't put it on the method sheet, we replaced persona development, which is highly analytical, with archetype extraction, which is actually highly emergent. So in a pioneering project with Microsoft, actually, as it happens, we had archetypes which are emergent abstract representations of culture on one dimension, and we had demographics on the other, and we created persona in the intersection. Right now, that's taken an anthropological technique and moving it sideways. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Just another question on the books. Francis just asking, when is the theory Kneffin book coming out?
I keep trying to explain this to my colleagues. It's all very well to complain I haven't written the book. But if anybody ever tries to write something, all right, it takes you 3 or 4 days to detune so you can write. And nobody has given me 2 or 3 days to detune. And once I finish this, I've got 90 minutes to get out a proposal on post-election reconciliation in the United States, right? I mean, that's a serious heavyweight project, right? So it's as soon as somebody gives me 3 or 4 months off without interruption that it will come out. And we're trying to work on that at the moment.
Thanks, definitely.
But if anybody's ever run a small company, you know you don't often get space.
Okay, David, how much time do you have? The last question?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, let's take one more.
Okay. So what sort of organization have you worked with that have excelled and this sort of sense making? And what sort of organization failed at it?
Yeah, that's a classic question. There's sometimes when I refuse to answer it because people are looking for something to copy, right? So I'll make some generic points, right? And this comes in with life cycle. And I used to train people on this when we first did the SDM and we've created the Genesis program. Early cycle products sell to early cycle buyers, not to late cycle buyers. So if somebody comes along and says, I had this the other day, all right, I was at the board of a company on Zoom, and they said, we brought you in because you've got all these techniques to handling complete uncertainty and novelty. And I said, yeah, we can do that. They said, well, can you give us 5 examples of where you've done it before and what they got out of it? And I said, but you wanted me to come in and talk about novelty. Yeah, and that's actually quite common. Yeah. So one of the things you have to do if you're doing new things is work out the nature of the market and the nature of the buyer. Right, that's kind of like key. So early cycle to early cycle, late cycle to late cycle, and so on. So the innovative companies, and this is quite scary. I mean, most of my development has been done with the intelligence communities, with military environments, with pharmaceuticals. As my mother once said to me, it's the evil guys who do new things. And you like new things too much, but that was my mother telling me off, all right? Those tend to be early adopters. So I do a lot of work, for example, with the Marines in Quantico and elsewhere, because actually military environments create a stress, which means people adopt new things. They also create credibility when you move it sideways. So find the early adopters. If they ask you for lots of cases, you're not going to sell anything new anyway. Go and sell the conventional stuff.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I'm really sorry, I got confused. We have more time, for more questions. So that was my mistake, sorry. And thanks very much for the answer, David.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so maybe just one more question. Dave, I think you called out, if you don't change people's language, you don't change the way they think. I know we have lots of change agents here in the audience. Would you have any examples, a lot of Scrum Masters, coaches, things like that, from maybe companies you've worked in on how that works?
Well, the other thing I wouldn't do is misuse language. So I don't know of anybody who can use the word master after doing a Scrum Master training. Yeah, mastery rather implies time, apprenticeship, and internship and stuff like that, right? So don't misuse it, all right? I've given you 2, aporia, exaptation. Yeah? And actually, Cynefin is another example. Yeah, and that was accidental. I was doing a debate with Nanaka, who I've encountered twice in my life, once on knowledge management, then on Scrum. And I've disagreed with him both times. So I had to do a debate about his framework for knowledge, which was called BART, which was then called SECI, S-E-C-I. And there was a big debate arranged between me, him, Peter Checkland, and Richard at the University of Lyon. They wanted to fight. And 2 weeks before we had the debate, he changed the name of SECI to BAR, which is a Japanese word with mystical significance. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be outpointed in debate. Nanaka-san, venerable Japanese sage, and I said, I suddenly remembered Cynefin from Welsh, right? So now Welsh academic has Welsh framework with Welsh name with deep spiritual significance. We got equality of debate. So that's actually how Cynefin got named, if I'm honest about it. So using words which people don't know allows you to actually tell a story and get people to think differently.
Okay. Very good. David, I have another question which possibly might be linked to what you just said. Somebody is asking about aporetic. Why would you deliberately introduce confusion?
Because it's only when you confuse things that people see new possibilities. I haven't actually done this now. I'm just finishing off the European Union Handbook on Crisis Management, which is rather ironic given the stupidity of the English, all right? We're blaming the English for Brexit. We blame the English for everything. You need to understand this. It's just a Welsh habit, all right? There are actually 6 exits from the aporetic. So if you shift things into the aporetic domain, it's liminal. It's colored green on Cynefin. You can then decide what goes into complicated, what goes into liminal complicated, what goes into complex, and so on. Yeah? So the deliberate state of confusion is an awareness that you don't know the answer yet, and you've got to go through a process. Yeah? So to be confused and not know it is stupid. To be confused and apparetic is highly sensible.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Okay, so guys, we'll finish up with the questions there. I think first of all, just a huge thank you to Dave Snowden for his time today. It's an excellent talk. Thanks so much, Dave, for your time and your expertise today. Dave, just a quick question. If people want to learn more about your work, is there anywhere we can direct them to?
You've got a new website as well, so you can go and look at that. They gave me that. They gave me that as a present as well. All right, I hadn't expected that. So, yeah, the website has got it. And we have two groups. We have Cognitive Edge, which is the commercial wing. We have Cynefin Centre, which I run, which is the not-for-profit government wing. Yeah, so the website is where stuff is. And as soon as I get these proposals out of the way this week, I'm going to be back blogging next week. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, cool. And congratulations on the most recent book as well, that gainers. So again, huge honor to have you. I think I said this to you, Dave. You've been on our bucket list for a long time with Ali to come and speak, and hopefully the next time you'll be in Dublin and you'll get to.
Yeah, just remember I've got too many relatives in Monaghan, so if you could keep it quiet so they don't know, that would help. Right? I'll be on duties. Yeah.
I don't know. We have a big crowd in from Monaghan today, so they might be here. Okay, so guys, thanks very much, Dave. So guys, we'll finish up there. Our breakout session starts in 10 minutes time, so we'd invite you to grab a tea, grab a coffee. We also have our exhibition stands and networking as well. So we'll see you in 10 more minutes.
Thank you very much.